Hey guys, let's continue building our AutoBlockExtractor plugin. So now we are going to code this method, process block extraction method. So first things first, we need to import the Autodesk namespaces. So we need the application services, Autodesk, AutoCAD.application services. We also need the database services and also the runtime, and the last one is the AutoCAD, the editor object, the editor input object. And also there's one thing, since we are writing the block attributes into a file, we will be needing the system.io, the input output library. Okay, so let's get rid of this throw new not implemented exception line. We don't need this. Next, we need to get hold of the document object. So document doc equals application dot document manager, and we have to open the drawing file that's being passed to this method, which is this one here, and dwg file. Oops. And once the drawing is open, we need to lock the document. Otherwise, it will give us an error. Next, we also need to get the database and editor object. So database db equals document.database. And also the editor, let's call it edt equals doc.editor. And let's provide the user with the message. Let's write message saying that selecting all the block name. You will be using this block name that's being passed. So basically this is the block name that the user enters into our form. So block name plus in the drawing. All right, next we need to get a transaction. Transaction trans equals db.transaction manager. We need to start the transaction. Okay, so now since we are going to retrieve a block, we need to declare a block table object. Let's just call that as bt equals trans.getObject, and that will be from the database dot block table ID, and then the open mode for read as block table. So next, we have to validate or to check if the block table has the block name. Otherwise, there's no point processing if there is a block name in the block table object. So if there is no block name exists in the block table, we'll just write message to the user saying that there is no block name, block found in the drawing. and then return right away. Okay. Otherwise, we'll continue with the processing. So create a typed value for the selection set filter, which means that there is a block existing in the block table. So we need to filter out those blocks basically. So before we can filter it out, we need to declare a typed value object. Let's call that as TV equals new typed value. And we will be having two criteria in our selection set. So we have to specify here too. So TV.setValue new typed value, and that would be, let's cast the DXF code that start, and that would be an insert. So this is the first filter in our criteria. The next one is TV.setValue new typed value, and we also need to cast that into an integer, the DXF code dot block name. So now we are filtering based on the block name, which is this argument that's being passed here. So block name, and that will be the second entry in our typed value array here. Okay, next, create a filter with these values. So selection filter, let's just call that as a filter equals new selection filter, and we have to pass in the type value, which is TV, and we need to declare a prompt selection result. Prompt selection result, let's just call that as PSR equals from the editor object dot select all, and passing in the filter. Okay, next we need to check if there is object selected. So if PSR dot status equals prompt status dot OK, which means that there is value selected, then we have to create a selection set that will hold or store those values. So selection set SS equals from the prompt selection result dot value. Okay, so now we have the selection set. Next, we need to first create the header, which means those are the tag strings of the attribute. So let's initialize a variable for the attribute value and the header. So attr_val equals just empty string for now, and for the header also just an empty string. Okay, so now we are going to write into a file. So what we need is a writer or a stream writer so that we can write into a file. So to do that, we need to declare a stream writer object. Let's just call that as writer equals new stream writer, and it requires one parameter, which is the file name. Okay, so this will be the file name of the extracted attributes. Next, we need to construct the header, by looping through the list of attributes of a block. So let's just get one object from the selection set, then we will loop through the attribute of that single object just to get those attribute tags. Okay, so to do that, let's declare selected object. Let's say cell obj equals from the selection set from here, because now this SS variable is store the value that's been selected from this from selection result. So all we have to do is SS and then pass the index value, which is the first one. So 0 means the first element in the array. And next we need to declare a block reference object. So let's just call that as bref, and that's coming from the transaction that get object. The object ID will be coming from the cell object that object ID, and then open mode for write, and that would be as a block reference. Okay, next let's just validate if the block reference that attribute collection that count equals 0. Let's just make sure that the object, the block, has an attributes. So the first two columns that we need are the insertion point X and the Y. So for the header, we need to at least initialize with the insertion point X and insertion point Y, plus the comma, of course, which will be added here, all the attribute names or the tag names. So now we can loop through the attribute collection using the for each. So for each object ID, let's just call this as ATT reference ID in block reference dot attribute collection. So now basically we're looping into the collection of blocks, or yeah, the attribute collection. So db object db equals trans.get object at reference ID, this one here, then open mode for read. Then now we can declare an attribute reference, too many T, attribute reference att ref equals obj dot or obj as attribute reference. This is not db object, obj. This is obj. This is what we used here. Okay. All right. So if the @ref, if this attribute reference is not equal to null, then we will add the attribute reference tag into the header. So header plus equals @ref.tag, and then of course with a comma, because the next iteration we will add the next attribute here. Okay, we are looping into the attribute collection. So every iteration we move into the next attribute. So we keep on adding to the header the tag plus the comma until we reach the end of the collection, which means that we cover all the attribute tag and we have the full header information. So next we need to write the header into the file. So write line, that would be the header, but I would like to remove the last comma from the header string. So we can do that by doing the substring, and we start from the 0, the first character, until the end of the header -1, which means we are getting rid of the last comma in the header. Okay, and that's it for our header. So now that we have the header, we can go ahead and loop through the block collection object and then write all the information for each block. So to do that, we have to loop through the selection set and extract the block attribute values. So for each selected object, let's call it as SOBJ in selection set SS, we have to assign a block reference trans.get object and SOBJ.object ID, open mode for write as block reference. Now, if the block reference that attribute collection that count equals 0, so we get the insertion points. So we use the ATTR val, this one here. These are the attribute values, plus equals br dot the block reference dot position dot x dot to string. And of course we also need to get the y. So br dot position dot y dot to string. Okay, so now we have the insertion point. Next we are going to loop through the attribute collection, same as what we've done for the header. So for each object ID, let's say at ATT reference ID in block reference dot attribute collection. So DB object OBJ. This is fine because both of these DB object OBJ is contained within this block of code, so there's no problem with that. So DB object trans dot get object at reference ID, open mode dot for read. And now we need to get hold of the attribute reference, ATT equals OBJ as attribute reference. Same thing, if at ref is not equal to null, then we will extract the value. So we will have to update the ATTR val plus equals attribute reference the text string. So in here we get the tag, but for this one we are now retrieving the value. Of course, plus comma, same thing. Then we need to write into the file, right line attr val dot substring, also getting rid of the last character, which is a comma, attr val dot length -1. Okay. And of course, since we are looping through the collection of blocks, we have to reset the value of attr val to an empty string. Otherwise, it will keep on appending. Okay, so we have to reset the value of this and then start all over again for the next block to get all their values. Okay, so that's basically it for getting all the attribute values. And now let's just display the count of the block selected. edt.write message, number of block name found is, let's just provide here the count from the selection set, that to string. And now we can close the writer. We have to close that, otherwise it will be kept open. And that's it. But we have here an if condition if there is selected object, otherwise we need to handle that as well. Else, let's just display a message to the user, there is no block found. Okay, and then finally we can close the drawing. So doc.close and discard. And that's it. Let us save our code. So basically, from the form, we are looping into the list of objects, those that are checked in the list box. And every single time we have to call this method to process the drawing file by passing the block name and the file name. So if we go to the code again, this will be our complete code for that method. Alright, so I think that should be good for this video. In the next video, we will continue building this utility here to create a method that will instantiate the form, and we will test our plugin as well. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video.